Looks like we have a good group, so I'll go ahead and get started while everyone else is still logging in. My name is Sarah Dillon. I'm the Communications and Grants Program Manager at California Relief. And today we have Katie McCleary doing a presentation for us. Katie is a storyteller and grant writer who has raised over $2.8 million for nonprofits. She has an MFA in creative writing and has taught English at various universities. She also founded a nonprofit, 916 Inc., which is an organization that transforms children and youth into confident writers and published authors. In 2015, Mashable named Katie as one of the 15 real Miss Americas in the nation for her work working with vulnerable populations. And in 2017, she won the Heart of a Hero Award from PBS. We're excited to have her share her expertise with us so we can all share our passion and our stories about trees. A few housekeeping things. This session is being recorded. We will have it posted on the website when we're done, as well as send out an email. And Katie prepared a handout for everyone to help with your storytelling process, and that's in the GoToWebinar panel. If you see handouts, there's 2 PDFs there you can download. It's the slides from today as well as Katie's handout. And we'll do questions at the end, but you can start sending them in the chat window as you think of them, or just at the end of the presentation. So with that, I will pass it off to Katie.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Well, thanks for coming today, and I am really excited because I am very passionate about storytelling, and I firmly believe that the most important job any nonprofit can do is tell the story of their impact. And that can get tricky for different organizations, and the majority of you are with trees and to tell the stories of trees and what makes trees compelling. So we're going to really unpack a lot of that today. And I say that these stories show impact, but they also seed impact, because the more stories that you tell that are compelling and that resonate with particular audiences, the more that they will want to get involved. I had a swipe here, there we go. So our agenda today is why storytelling is the most important job of a nonprofit. We're also going to focus on you, the storyteller. People have a lot of anxieties about writing or about sharing stories or about how to go gather stories from their clients without maybe harming them or exploiting their story. People have all kinds of insecurities, but you are a storyteller, and guess what? You naturally tell stories whether or not you're aware of it. So we're going to unpack that a little bit. We're going to talk about the building blocks of a compelling story. Compelling is the key word. I'm going to offer some activities for you to do. I call them sprint lists, which means that it's just sort of a really quick brain dump. We won't have time on the webinar to do those sprint lists because that would take up a chunk of time, which would sort of feel like dead air for you. But they are things that you can do after the webinar, and I give you specific instructions, and then also the handout sort of reiterates these activities as well. We're going to focus on a formula, probably a formula you may have heard before in the nonprofit sector, where we tell stories that blend the brain or the head with the heart, or really the human connection, and then how we get to the wallet, which is the ask. Whether or not we're asking for money, we can also ask for people's time and people's talents too. And we're going to talk about the art of capturing stories and where we can share them, and dive into a little bit about audience, because the stories that we tell only matter if they sort of land correctly to your intended audience. So knowing your audience is important. And then there'll be a Q&A, and the further resources are the handouts. Sorry, I'm still learning how to swipe this. It's like, not one, there we go. Okay. So storytelling, it is your most valuable and affordable tool, right? It costs you nothing except for time. And of course, we know that time is at a premium in the nonprofit world. But the more that you can make an investment of time, you'll be able to see the resources flow in. So you want to tell stories, and you want to collect a lot of them, and you want to be varied in the stories that you do collect, because you're really creating unique content for communications and grants. And in our really noisy world on social media, you know, funders that have to weed through 100 to 200 grants, you need to stand out. So storytelling is a way to have unique content. You'll create a memorable brand. You can gain community attention and trust. You know, at nonprofits, a lot of things boil down to trust. Can donors and funders and clients and stakeholders trust you with everything to enact your mission? And stories are a way to show how your mission is working, and you gain trust in that way. So amplify your mission. You could provide testimony to advocate for resources. Sometimes it's not going into grants or on social media or in newsletters. Sometimes you need to tell a really quick story in 2 minutes to elected officials at a city council meeting, perhaps. How can you tell a story, a good story, in 2 minutes? It's hard, but it can be done. And I'm going to give a few examples about that. You can recruit stakeholders. You can record history. I mean, the more stories that...
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
So when it comes to recording history, you're collecting stories over time, and those just sort of compile up, and you'll be able to see how you're sort of moving the needle. In particular, if you're working in disadvantaged communities, we would hope that over time conditions improve. You'll empower clients, staff, and volunteers. There's a hesitation sometimes to go out and get stories, because you have to ask, and you have to ask questions. And if you really get to the compelling stuff, you're asking questions that might be a little uncomfortable. However, in my experience, people really want to share their story. The majority of them do, even in that initial hesitation. And so there's this sort of element of empowerment when people begin to uncover you know, the story of their lives, or the things that are affecting them, and how they're being transformed by that, for good or bad. And so the more we share stories, the more we talk to people, it's actually pretty empowering, because you're collectively building towards something. You'll raise money. And then lastly, storytelling is non-stop. It happens all the time. The world is awash with stories. So my question for you is, in your organization, there is typically a chief storyteller. And who is that? And what I encourage you to think about today is that you can also be a chief storyteller. Every single person in your organization should be sort of armed with maybe 3 different stories that really show your impact. So it is the job of everyone, even from the secretary to the office clerk. You know, it doesn't even have to be frontline people out in the field. Everybody sort of needs to be able to tell a resonant story about your mission. So the good news is that you're already a storytelling machine. Like I said, the world's awash with stories. We are swimming in them. So storytelling is how we make sense of the world, of what's happening to us and others. You might have heard the sort of adage that says, you know, when we go to sleep at night, our brain stays up telling stories and locking away those memories so that we can make better decisions the next day. Stories are how our brain makes sense of it all. So it's constantly happening, whether or not you believe it. It's automatic, but you have to ask the right questions to get to the good stuff. It's not just who, what, when, where, how. That is like a nuts and bolts of a story. But to really get to the depth of it, you have to be curious. And to be curious, in some ways, you have to enter with a fresh slate. And that's hard to do because you're really mired in the story of your organization already. But if you can go out and meet one of your clients or your volunteers or somebody who invests in your organization and really be curious about why they're engaging the way that they engage, without the assumptions of all of your language and your story within your organization. I mean, we might automatically jump and think, well, they identify with our mission. They must really care about that. But why? You have to go deeper. Good storytelling, in the end of it, it fuels human connection because it's unique and universal instead of vague and general. I'm going to unpack that for a little bit. So good storytelling really focuses on the human aspect of the work. And you guys are working on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, you're working on building tree canopies, you're trying to make arguments about why we should remove concrete and plant trees. You're making arguments to developers about, you know, the need for more green and natural resources rather than, you know, room for parking lots. So it's hard to tell in some ways the story of trees and plants. Even though people care about them, people really care about the human connection to them. So we have to sort of reposition it and say, how are trees and plants and air quality really impacting that human being? And what makes a good story unique and universal is actually in the details. It's the showing of who a particular person is within the story, right? So you're giving names and you're giving details like their age. You might describe what they're wearing. The more unique you are about a story and its details, the more universal it becomes, because humans need a way to attach to stories, and it is concrete, specific details that really make the story come alive in our heads, and it's what we can attach to. Humans have a really hard time attaching to stories that are really vague and general. I'm going to give you an example. I've taught storytelling a lot, and I have an exercise where you sit down with another person and you say, tell me about your organization. It's just a wide open question. I can't tell you how many times I have learned about a building that was being built by an organization and not about the human beings that were affected by the building. You know, so we get sort of tunnel vision about what we do in our daily work, but it's really when we drop into the human impact, the human story of what our work does, and we kind of shift the focus away from maybe what our organization is actively doing every day and shifting it more on the human in the story and how they're living their lives and how they're operating in connection to our mission. If we spotlight that, it actually reflects really nicely back on our work in the office. Storytelling captures attention. People will listen better to your cause. And there are certain ways that people like to be approached. Some people like to be approached with data and hard facts, the quantitative side of things. Some people really like to be approached with sincerity. They want the heart stories. And the research shows actually that it's about 50-50. But it's storytelling, a blending of data and the human connection that will capture people's attention because it gives them the what, the when, the why, and the how in a way that's easy to digest. So we're going to launch into how to craft compelling stories. So I have a lot of little Snoopy comics here for us. I love Snoopy. He's always struggling with his story writing, but he also keeps going and he does admire his own work even in his frustration. So those will be sort of speckled throughout. So the magic is in telling a compelling story. And most people don't tell compelling stories because they lack the following. They lack the knowledge of the building blocks. They lack time. I would say that this is probably the second biggest thing, is that they do lack time. They lack the time to be curious, to draft the work, and or to share with an audience. I can tell you that writing and collecting stories really seems to be sort of the thing that drops to the bottom of the to-do list in a nonprofit. And you need to invest the time to be able to sit and think, to draft questions, to choose your subjects to interview, and then to draft a couple different versions. And we know that in the nonprofit world, typically everything comes down last minute because we're so stretched thin. But really, that time investment is important and will pay off. They lack a focus or a theme. There's sort of this desire to shove everything into a story. I want to tell you about all the issues that we're solving, all the clients that we're serving, all the schools that we help put community gardens in, right? There's this pressure to do that, but really a story can only hold so much, or readers and listeners get overwhelmed. So it's nice to sort of choose a focus or a theme for a particular story. I'm going to make the argument today that you focus on one person in a story, or you focus on a group, but you don't really delineate them down into different characters. It's almost too many voices and opinions in a story. The stories also, I should clarify, are kind of short and sweet. We live in a culture now where people are reading only 2 to 3 minute stories. I can tell you that to read one piece of paper that is double spaced, typically Times New Roman font size 12, to read that aloud, it takes 3 minutes. And if you notice on social media, you'll see sort of articles pop up and they'll say this is a 1 minute read or a 2 minute read or a 3 minute read. We just are not a nation of readers anymore. So stories can only hold so much. They're typically 1 to 2 pages or maybe even just 2 paragraphs. So you've got to be quick, in and out, and you have to be focused. A specific audience. In the drafting mode, you kind of want to go in with some intention to know where might this story go, or you may be writing sort of just a general story, and then maybe in revision, you're revising it for different sets of audiences, right? How you approach one donor may not be how you approach a government funder. They're interested in hearing different things. So you do need to think about your audience. They also lack conflict or transformation. This is really important. A story, a human-based story, is about some kind of change. So you can sort of go back to high school or college English classes, right? Your teacher would have told you, how did that character change from A to B? That is the story. And change itself requires conflict. I don't know about you, but I've met a lot of people who are really tired of conflict. It makes them uncomfortable. They don't want to approach it, and so they kind of avoid it. And you'll notice sometimes when you read stories fall flat because it wasn't crystal clear sort of what the conflict or the problem was and how over the course of the story there was a change that happened that transformed, right? And for the better. Those are the stories that we're telling. So you need to always start in conflict, right? And as nonprofits, we're in the business of solving problems. So you should be able to get to the conflict pretty fast. It goes up front. Most people don't tell compelling stories because they lack those memorable, concrete details, those visual cues that build a story in a reader's head. You can use dialogue or quotes to help do that. People lack an editor. That is also an element of time. Did you build in enough time to get feedback from, a friend, a colleague, someone who likes to read, somebody who likes to write? And this is not just for grammar and spelling. You're going to look at flow and rhythm and did the story make sense? What is missing? Could you visualize it in your head? What did you walk away with? Those are also the kind of editors that you need. And then first and foremost is confidence. People don't tell compelling stories because they lack confidence. There's a lot of, well, I think this, or I know this, or I saw this. Those are sort of qualifiers. In a story, we present the story, almost like a journalist presents a story, right? It's not always buffered with, in my opinion, or what I saw was. It's sort of a way to hand wring. Hand wringing is sort of, where you take the kitchen towel and you're like, I don't know what they're going to think about this story, so I'm just going to say, this is what I know. But with the story, you're kind of bold about it. You present it. You have confidence. So the building blocks of a compelling story, right, is to track adversity to transformation, that conflict in the very beginning. So what did your organization do that made things better? You want to have focus on a single character or a group, right? Like these are the hero or the heroes. So I would talk about them as a singular group instead of saying, well, I was with Bob, Larry, Joe, Mike, and Fred. Be like, well, I was with the volunteers of Green and Clean, and the volunteers of Green and Clean care about. It's a singular group. You want to put it in setting and time. We need to know where we're at. Context is huge, right? It often comes in the form of history or data. So if I'm going to talk about a neighborhood, a disadvantaged community like Del Paso Heights in Sacramento, I want to be able to provide in 1 or 2 sentences or in one detail sort of a context for maybe why that community is disadvantaged. You want an underpinning theme or a focus. Just like I said, you can't tell all the stories or showcase all the things. That's why you want to have a lot of mini stories to be able to capture the variety of things that you do and your impact. Those memorable concrete details, dialogue or quotes, and then revision. So the real work in writing is in making choices about what to highlight and why, and thinking about your audience. So you may go out and spend, 30 to 45 minutes or an hour or 2 hours with a group, and you're going to get all these rich details and all these stories and all these impacts, and you'll want to write it all out. In revision, you can begin to parcel those out, right, and make choices about what to highlight. And then every story really does have a beginning, middle, and an end. And most people forget the end. Most people start at the beginning, they get to the middle, and then things sort of fall apart. At the end of your story, because you're a nonprofit, there needs to be sometimes, often actually, a clear call to action. You just read this story, you just saw our impact. How now can you get involved? And depending on your audience, you may have a very specific ask. So I've written you an example, sort of testing it out, right? So we'll sort of read the example, and you can see if I was able to hit on most of the stuff prior. It starts with a quote. I just want to breathe easier, overall, like not just in my lungs, but in my head too. I mean, I'm tired and all, and some days it's hard to breathe, but I'm not stopping, not till this is all green and healthy. Jarrett Barnes waves his hands over a desolate patch of brown that used to be a playground. He's only 24, but at this age, he's already a neighborhood hero. As part of Happy Acres Planting with a Purpose grant, Barnes seized the opportunity to advocate for shade trees, fruit trees, and other plants to his neighborhood in Del Paso Heights, a blighted community scarred by crime and poverty for more than 50 years. He's greened a local park already, providing a safe place for children to play without being burnt on hot equipment, while also reducing greenhouse gases. For Barnes, though, this goes way beyond climate change and beautification. Barnes grew up here, wanted to play football at his high school, but his asthma, poor air quality, and the urban island heat effect made it impossible for him to participate. In turn, Barnes felt as if he couldn't live the life he wanted. I didn't know growing up that my neighborhood was impacted by the green divide, and that was contributing to my health problems. There was always a lack of trees, no shade, the heat and stink of hot concrete. I want to change that for so many reasons, mostly so that little boys like me can play and breathe easy without struggling. Barnes is referring to 2 things common to disadvantaged communities. And this is sort of where I stopped, because we could go on and on and on, and we only have 45 minutes. But if you look in these ones, I underlined for you some sort of concrete details. So the desolate patch of brown, providing a safe place for children to play without being burnt on hot equipment. He wanted to play football at his high school, but his asthma, poor air quality, and the urban isle heat effect made it impossible. There's another one too within his quote below, right? The heat and the stink of hot concrete. It's those sort of concrete images and details that really are visual in our heads, or they access some sort of our 5 senses. Those are actually the details that stay with people. People don't typically remember facts, data, name, actions. We actually remember details that sort of affect our five senses. So those are really important and able to sort of show your story. Now, if I were to continue to sort of write this article, I would be able to then talk and uncover and bring in some data about the two things common to the disadvantaged communities, which for me would be to explain the urban island heat effect. You could offer information about the Green Divide. You could go into data about how disadvantaged communities are impacted by the lack of a tree canopy. You could go forth with what Barnes transformed through the grant program, how he became involved in your organization, his plans for that desolate patch from the beginning of the story, and just how he himself was transformed by being a volunteer maybe, or being part of one of your Seed Warrior programs where he learned about how to plant trees and maintain and care for them. And then at the end, you could add, a clear ask, like, won't you join us? Won't you join Barnes in greening Del Paso Heights? So there's a lot of different ways it can go. But when we build the story, right, we had a character, we had concrete details, we had dialogue, we had a setting, and we definitely had conflict, right? So compelling nonprofit stories include three strands. You have 25% is the ask, 25% is the head, and I'm going to really break these down for you. But really 50% should be that heart or that human connection. You'll have to think about your audience, right? Who is it? So there's this old adage, and the adage is actually not by Mark Victor Hansen, but he's the one who put together this graphic, is that people don't buy with their head, but with their heart. The heart is closer to the wallet than the head. And of course, I'm using the wallet symbolically for money, but also you could include time and talent in that, whatever a person is going to give of themselves. Like I said earlier, the research actually shows that half the population prefers to be approached with data first. They want to know, how competent are you in what you're presenting? The other half of the population wants sincerity. So that adage, like, people don't care what you know until you show them how much you care, that only really applies to 50% of the population. So in a nonprofit world, though, you sort of have to do the blend of both. But you'll want to think a little bit strategically about how funders want to be approached, donors want to be approached, and then this entire list below. So these stories, almost, if you think about it, are like Play-Doh. You might write one big long story, and that becomes a lot of Play-Doh for you to play with and chunk into different little pieces, different little sculptures and statues and stories for different people. Lastly, building your confidence. Writing doesn't just belong to the writers, period. Everybody gets to write. Everybody gets to tell stories. Like, we're human, you're doing it. So at first, when you begin to draft stories, you need to tell them in your own natural voice. You don't try to sound like someone else or think what you should sound like or try to sound like your boss or your CEO, okay? You have to make sure in some way that these stories are the ones that resonate for you, because it's really your spirit and your attitude and your presence in telling the story that attracts the listeners. And that's true if you're telling a story in person, face to face, or if it's on the page, how you write. So you, the storyteller, are sort of the contagion, which means that, the stories you tell, they do infect people, and you want to infect them for good. You should be unafraid to spread the gospel, if you will, of your mission, and always, always have an ask ready at the end of your story. Does this appeal to you? Might you want to get involved? Have you ever thought about this before? Come and join us. Storytelling and asking gets incredibly easier over time. It is a muscle that you can develop. But sometimes stories become stale. So you'll want to go out and just keep gathering stories, keep free writing, even taking 5 minutes out of your day to find a point of impact that happened in your organization, you know, and maybe you're not out in the field. Maybe it happens in the office. Maybe you see a staff person who was really energized by something that they read in the field, right? So just try to jot down these stories that sort of come through so that you can keep at it, keep building that muscle, and keep it fresh. So here's some of the activities that I have people do. When I'm face-to-face with people, I have them get into small groups, and they have to do these sort of let go free writes, where they sort of make a sprint list of everything they know. It's sort of like vomiting on the page. And I break it down into the head, the heart, and the wallet. So the head would be things about facts, data, statistics, hard numbers. It's more logical, you know, if this, then that. It's people who like to be approached with a competency mindset. How much do you really know? How smart are you? How have you done your research, right? These are often in the realm of government and of funders, certain funders in particular. So in Sacramento, we have something called the Big Day of Giving, which is a 24-hour fundraising event. And so we have to teach nonprofits how to tell stories very quickly because there's a lot of noise that day, and all of it happens on social media. So I wanted to provide this example for you of a Facebook post. So it's got pictures, right? And it's from the California Native Plant Society. And it said, did you know that California's native plants represent nearly 35% of the total number of plant species in the United States, and nearly 25% of all native plants found in North America, north of Mexico? CNPS works hard to protect and promote our iconic native flora. The Big Day of Giving is just 9 days away. Please remember to support, right? So that's a total kind of head competency argument. And, you know, that's a formula, too, to start off with the story. Did you know? We kind of know that data is coming our way. So activity list number 1 for you to do, I call this things that make you go, like data, right? Like it piques your interest. So what are the numbers or supporting data or evidence that you probably have already gathered, right? I have 2 kind of examples that are written pretty succinctly here. I'm just going to read the bottom one, actually, just for sake of time. According to 2017 Sacramento County data, the average cost of rent for a basic 2-bedroom apartment is $1,326. A single mom would have to work at least 80 hours a week at $10.50 an hour job to afford a basic 2-bedroom apartment. So that's just a lot of data. It's right there, and it sort of is a little bit mind-blowing, right? It does have a human element in it because I've added a single mom, right? I didn't put it vague or general and say a person. I'm giving an example, like a single mom. That's a very specific and unique detail, and it actually makes the story come alive better. All right, let's move to the heart. So we sometimes talk about in stories something called the hero's journey. And everybody is sort of on a hero's journey, right? Like there's a problem and then a character is called to solve it. And then they go on a journey to solve it and something changes. There's usually, you know, conflict and rewards along the way, but ultimately they sort of come full circle and they land in the new normal. Everybody's on a hero's journey in my belief system. And you as a nonprofit have a lot of mini heroes in your nonprofit already, which is staff, volunteers, your clients who are working hard to improve conditions. So those are your characters. So what adversity and conflict are they facing? What's the journey that they've been on of the ups and downs of this process, right? And when I think about, you know, schools in particular, and we want to go and plant all these trees, right? Well, we know that schools really want community gardens, but we also know that fruit trees maybe don't provide as much shade as we would need, and they don't really reduce as much greenhouse gases as shade trees do versus fruit trees. So, right, that journey has ups and downs. Who's maintaining the trees? How did we have to teach the teachers and the children and the staff and the maintenance workers to care for those trees once we've planted them, right? So every journey has up and downs. The key is to find the human element within it. Those memorable concrete details, and then a resolution, right? What was the change that happened? This is the reason your mission exists. This is another one from the Big Day of Giving. I like these because they're very short and succinct. People can get very long-winded. We want you to get long-winded because I want you to make a lot of Play-Doh to be able to parcel out that Play-Doh and make a lot of little sort of stories from it. So this one says, Asian bull Elephant Nicholas was riding a tricycle in a circus by age 2. Now at 23, he found sanctuary at Paws 10 years ago. That's it. That's it. That's the story. It's not even a human story, but I actually really feel for this elephant, right? He was riding a tricycle at the age of 2. Oh my goodness. So he had to perform for a really long time and then have a picture. We could, of course, expand that story, right? How did he get there? Who saved him? You know, what did the organization have to do to get him acclimated or out of that environment? So that elephant even was on his own hero's journey. So activity list number 2 for the heart would be things that make you go, oh, oh, ah, right? So if data makes you go, right? I want to investigate that further and learn more. The heart, right, makes you go, oh, oh, ah, right? It really does tug at you in a different way. So you'll have to think about a lot of times when your organization was a hero, lended a helping hand, you know, and again, shift that spotlight to your clients, to your volunteers, to a staff person, right? So how did that story start and how did it end? Don't forget the struggle, the ups and downs that happened in the middle. So I have an example here. Sorry, it's not tree or ecological based, but Marcus is a happy 8-year-old boy who loves eating ice cream with his auntie. Last year, Marcus struggled with reading and fell behind 2 grade levels after his dad was incarcerated. Auntie Sheila advocated for him to be in reading partners, and now Marcus enjoys reading books for his age and is excited to grow up and own an ice cream bookstore named Bookworm Scoops. That's actually a really short story, but if you read into the details, right, readers infer. They can read between the lines. In some ways, you have to trust your reader. You don't have to go into long-winded backstory or talk about what his dad was incarcerated for, right? The focus is on Marcus. And in this way, we're actually showing Marcus in this really beautiful light. He loves to eat ice cream. He struggled, right? But now we're doing this, short and sweet. And you could see how you might telescope that story, right? And telescopes, right, they go narrow to wide. You can think about an accordion, you know, like going from a big long spectrum to the little one. So what you want to do is be able to sort of have a long story, 2 pages, but maybe even and have the skill to reduce it down to a paragraph. At the end, you have the ask, right? It's direct, no sidestepping around the ask. Be confident, be brave. You can ask for time, talent, or treasure. And if it's a money amount, right, or even a time amount or a talent amount, you know, be reasonable. Think about your audience and where this story is going to go. If it's going to go in a newsletter or on a website, yeah, it's going to be vague and large, right? You can come and do this, you can do that. But if you're one-on-one with a person or a small group, do your homework ahead of time and really think about what they can reasonably say yes to. And then I would stretch that a little farther and kind of realize, you know, if I want $1,000, but I know they're probably good for $750, I'm definitely not going to start at $500. I'm going to start at $1,000 and kind of work my way down a little bit, right? Time bound. This is important. There is an element of adding urgency to your needs, right? To these stories, because often we know that people sometimes have to listen or see something 7 times before they get it. But if you attach urgency to it or some sort of time-bound limitation, like hurry now, don't wait, you're going to be able to get an answer quicker than not. So, give it time boundaries. Make it easy to give. Give directions, visit our website, join now, call this person, donate here. And then there is an element of pressure, right? And that does go back a little bit to the time-bound thing. And peer pressure or fear-based. If you don't give, then this will happen. That's what marketers do, right? Marketers are all about afflicting a person so that they'll buy something. We do the same thing in nonprofits. Afflict them with your heart-tugging stories, your data, right? And you're pressuring them to get involved. And that's okay. That's our job. So in this one for Big Dog, this was actually written from, a volunteer or a client, right? Rather than a staff person. They really are your best ambassadors, showcasing your clients and your volunteers who are doing the work, being transformed by the work. That's who you want to focus on. So this mom put out sort of a call to action. She was asking for donations for Waking the Village. And it says, I challenge each of my friends who was also a teen parent like me and thrived on their own or with the help of someone special to donate $30 to this great organization that provides service and structure for up to 16 young parents at a time and for children up to 18 months. That is a very clear ask. And it gives it an amount. It tells what the amount is for. It gives the link about how to give. It's very direct. So activity list number 3 would be things that make you go, okay, I'm in, I'm gonna do it, right? You wanna craft 1 or 2 direct asks for your organization with a specific money amount that includes, something from your story points from lists 1 and 2. So I would encourage you to try to fit in all 3, right? You're gonna hit the head, the heart, and the wallet. Sometimes that might not be appropriate for your audience. So you'll have to kind of finesse and choose and be strategic about it. For Sierra Service Project, this was one they did on Facebook. Give together because we need to take care of elders. SSP prioritizes building wheelchair ramps and stairs. When elders can enter and exit their home without worrying about their safety, their world expands and everyone benefits. Donate today. And we can see in the image that $1,500 is what it takes to build that ramp. So now imagine if we were able to go back to our barn story from Del Paso Heights about him wanting to provide shade trees on playgrounds and provide better air quality in his neighborhood and really close that green gap and divide, right? I could actually see us taking the 2 pages or the 2 sort of paragraphs that I wrote, putting an ask on it, and really getting it down to 1 sentence, right? This is a great example. I've learned about elders. I know that SSP prioritizes something to help them. I know why. What's missing for me here, I like the picture of the group, but it would have been great to also maybe have 1 more picture with a singular elder and maybe a quote from them about what it means for them to have more accessibility. So it's a good formula to look at. So it all goes like this: head, heart, wallet, repeat. Head, heart, wallet, repeat. That is the formula. So where do we share stories, and what's the art of capturing them? Let's see, there we go. The art of capturing stories. Again, I would like you to find a single person or a singular group to focus on with a transformation story, from the change from A to B. How you mine that is you got to talk to people in your organization. You got to talk to people at your volunteers. You have to pay attention, right? Who is being really impacted by this transformative work? Go and interview them, right? And be approachable, be friendly, and be outgoing. And don't rush your time together. I think there's nothing more irritating than somebody who wants to interview me and hear my story, and oh, they only have 20 minutes. And so what happens is that it feels like an interrogation. Okay, so tell me what happened here, and then what? Okay, then who, and then why? I'm not going to be able to drop into story and give you those rich details and that depth that you're looking for. So again, schedule time to do the work. You know, be present. Don't be distracted. Don't look at your phone. If you have an Apple Watch, don't constantly look at your Apple Watch and look at your messages when you're talking to someone. Be fully present, okay? Be prepared to ask meaningful questions. Tell me about is great. The who, what, when, where, why, those are all good questions too, but again, they can feel like an interrogation, right? And it actually, kind of the more specific you are about those, you're not allowing for the story to sort of open and unfold. So tell me about is a really great way to enter a conversation. You could say, tell me about why you care about planting trees so much. Tell me about your neighborhood. Tell me about your past that makes you want to be here today. So you kind of ask these open-ended questions and you just need to listen and take notes. You could record too. Why do you feel that way? Is another one, right? So somebody will say something and they'll be in story. You need to interrupt them. You're the journalist and the interviewer. Oh, so you might hear something for energy, right? So in the original story, when Barnes is talking about, you know, why he's such a young man passionate about planting trees, he said, I want young boys like me to be able to breathe easy and not struggle so hard. You say, whoa, I want you to open that up a little bit more. Tell me about why you feel that way. What experiences led you to know this? See if they can drop into a specific story of something that they faced that makes them want to be the change. Why is this important for you? That's another great question. Why is this important for you? In fact, of any of those who, what, when, where, why questions, why is the most important question. In fact, if you listen to people on podcasts, they often only open up questions with two things. Tell me about why. Why was that important? Why do you feel that way? Why is your best question. And then again, ooh, tell me more about that. I want the details, right? I want the details. You need to take detailed notes, or you could record the conversation on your phone, but you need to ask whoever you're interviewing first. You also need to receive explicit permission to share their story. You need to understand what's allowable and not, right? You want to get their name and their age and stuff, but they may not be comfortable with some information being out into the world. So they sort of need to know where it goes. I could give a whole entire other webinar about the stories that exploit the clients of nonprofits. There's a lot of sort of people selling, you know, kind of these really horrible stories that actually really paint people as victims and in crisis all the time. And there's a different way to talk about people and to show their struggle without demeaning them. So it's a careful line to walk. And just one of the easiest ways to do it is come with good intention and be honest about what you're gonna report in the story. You may even share the story with them before it goes out. And then take pictures. Graphics speak volumes. Again, we are a declining nation of readers. People only want to read 1, 2 to 3 minute stories, and people are impatient. So images and graphics, infographics, you want to make sure you're balancing that those infographics are sharing a part of their story, but maybe it's not the same story that's showing up in the text that accompanies the graphic. So, you know, with that elephant story, right? You just get one sort of sentence about him, but that picture of that elephant, right, laying down in nature on the hill, rolling around, that also sort of shows something as well. It's complementary. The text and the graphic should complement each other. So craft elements. At the end of drafting a story, right, you want to get an editor to help you proofread not only for grammar, spelling, and verb tense. You want to ask a reader or an editor, what's the point of the story? What do you remember after reading it? What was your takeaway? Is it clear what I want you to do at the end? What was repetitive? What was unclear? Those are just 5 simple questions you can ask somebody after they read your work. And you'll be able to tell if they got it or they didn't get it, right? So many people that you hand stuff to, though, they'll just say, yeah, it's good, good job. You have to ask them specific questions, just like how you interviewed your subject to get a compelling story, right? And tell them it's okay to be honest. I'm trying to improve and get better. I want to make sure that this is right. I really want this story to help seed more impact in our organization, right? So don't get defensive, don't get argumentative if they point something out. This is about being open and learning and doing and growing. Overall revision thoughts that you kind of want to have in your head when you're drafting a compelling story is, will my audience identify with the material I've chosen? Is it a good blend of head, heart, and wallet, the ask? Is there conflict in the story right away that hooks the reader or the listener to keep them reading or listening? So that conflict kind of has to be right away. It is a hook. And then what change effort was amplified in the story? Is there a transformation from A to B? And does it represent my organization's voice? So I told you in building confidence to definitely write it in your own voice. That's where you have to start. Before you publish or share it, right, you want to ensure that it is with the branding and the voice and the tone of your organization. Every single organization has one. They have their own vocabulary, their own vernacular, their own way, the way that they speak. So you'll want to run by your story by a CEO or if you have a public information officer or somebody who deals with the public. I'm imagining that most of you are small and grassroots, right, with only a couple staff members. So try to agree, like, is this our collective voice? Is the tone, the mood reflective of how we want to be seen? That's all stuff that you can fix in revision. But when you're drafting, you need to do it in your own natural voice or you're just going to hit writer's block. Revision is where you get to make choices and do the cleanup. Do not try to write a perfect draft right away, which again is why you have to give yourself enough time. Furthermore, who successfully tells the most stories of your nonprofit success? Someone does. Someone in your organization is bringing in money, and they ain't bringing in money without telling stories. So who's doing it? You should collect their stories and try to understand why their stories are working. And then also try to understand maybe what's not working too. Learn from them. So when you're a reader, I want you to read like a writer. You're thinking about the craft and how that was put together. You can, oftentimes when I have writer's block, I go to a story or a news article from another nonprofit or a grant, and I look at it for the structure and the format. And I actually use their structure and format. I begin to replace their words with my words. And it is a way for me to get the ball rolling and started, especially when I'm stuck. So start reading like a writer. Start pilfering for structure and form from things that you admire. So again, is there a formula at play? If so, what is it? You got to dig deep to learn why people are responding to the stories. Be picky in the stories that you tell. I'd like you to craft 3 of them that showcase sort of the best of what you transform in your organization. So you could choose 3 different subjects, right? Curbing the heat island effect, providing shade structures at playgrounds, beautification efforts for developers, but we know that, you know, the developers care about beautification, we're caring about other stuff, but that might be a valuable point for those developers, right? They care about beautification. Maybe you don't, you care about the other stuff, right? But they're your audience. So you might need to have a story that placates to what they care about, because guess what? When you placate to them, they will invest. So there's that old adage, you know, treat others as you would like to be treated. Well, there's a different one, and that's the golden rule, right? There's something called the platinum rule. The platinum rule is treat others as they want to be treated. It's sales 101. You cater to them. So you need to have a variety of stories, right? Again, when practicing how to tell stories, you want to go for an accordion style or that telescoping effect. Can you tell the story in 3 minutes, in 3 pages? Can you do it in 1 minute? Can you do it in 1 paragraph? You know, if you aim for 2 minutes, you're going to be ready for any elected official council meeting, right? Don't always start with your mission. Start with story. And then I want you lastly to really reflect, and this is the thing that everybody puts at the bottom of their to-do list. If you could take 20 to 30 minutes to just free write, it doesn't even have to go anywhere. It's just for you. I want you to write down why you work at your nonprofit. Y'all aren't getting rich. You're not. Why do you work there? And why do you work so hard? What is it about your mission, your work, what you have witnessed that tugged at your brain, heart, and your wallet? So that's my time. We have about 5 minutes for questions. I know I covered a lot, but I tried to sort of be focused about, you know, what makes a compelling story and that human element. Because while we all love trees and we all love beautification, we need to understand their impact on humans. And if anybody ever saw the movie Schindler's List by Steven Spielberg, you know, that movie addressed sort of the atrocities of World War II and what happened to Jews in Europe. And it's a black and white movie. In that movie, though, that's I think like 3.5 hours long, there's one girl in it who wears a red coat. And you see her periodically throughout the film in the red coat. Humans attached to her rather than an entire group of people. We actually care about sort of a singular thing rather than the large abstract like horror and thing. So for trees and plants, right, like you need to find and drop into the human element. Who's being impacted and tell the human side of what trees and plants can do.
Thank you, Katie. That was so much great insight. And if anyone has any questions, you can start sending them our way in the chat window. I also want to remind everyone that if you missed at the beginning, the slides that Katie just went through are available in the handout section, as well as a handout that Katie made for you to with some worksheets to go through. And those will be available online as well as the recording. I have one question. I really appreciated all the things you had to say about how to tell someone else's story and how to draw that out. I know when I've worked with people, like sharing their testimonial for a nonprofit, it's when they're speaking to you casually, they speak from their heart, and then the minute you say like, we want to share your testimonial, they like flip into their brain and they sometimes get really formal or, you know, trying to write the story as they go. So I think those tips you shared about giving it a lot of time and asking probing questions really help like drop people back into their heart and just tell an authentic story. Do you recommend always interviewing people versus having people write their stories?
I think you could do both, but I think often we're just interviewing, right? And so I try to do 2 things. One, we're going to be at an informal setting, like a coffee shop, just chilling out and hanging out. Another really, really great way to capture a story, if it's possible, is to go on a walk. Walking really drops people into informality. It's something about the wandering movement of our bodies that just sort of allows us to fall into story. And I think there's an aspect of walking side by side and not actually looking at each other in the face that allows people to tell better stories. There's like, you know, if I'm looking at someone, we do sort of go into our brain, right? And then our ego shows up. We want to be right. We want to be seen as smart. We want to know how I'm coming off and being portrayed.
Yeah.
So interviewing people, walking side by side with them and actually not looking them in the eye all the time helps get to stuff that really matters. I would always start there. You know, I always sort of preface people saying, hey, we're just going to have a conversation. You know, it's when we walk in with the I have 20 minutes and I have all these questions to give you, and can you give me the answers, or can I just talk to you on the phone and interview you for half an hour because I got to write this article? You're not going to get what you need. It really, you can talk to people on the phone and have them drop into story. It's harder, but you can't rush it. So I would recommend that. I do think in terms of people writing their own stories, you have to kind of set a safe environment for people to do that and just allow them to play and be like, there's no right or wrong way to do this, you guys. My prompt is simply a question, and what stories show up for you is what stories show up for you. So you have to kind of, you have to allow them grace and freedom, right?
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. Anyone else? I'm not seeing any other questions come in, so
well, thank you, everyone.
You can do that. Was so great.
If you need, you can get a hold of me through California Relief, and I know I've been reading some grant stuff, and I love hearing all the stories that are actually pouring in from your grantees. So great stuff there.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And this will all be available tomorrow, the handouts and the audio link.
Thanks.
Thank you.